Good morning to most. Good afternoon to the viewing audience across the pond. I am your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to What Fresh Hell, a new show we're trying out where Deep State Kuba gives you updates on the global geopolitical goings on. If you are a returning listener, subscriber, or one of our very valued patrons, thank you so much for joining us in this inaugural journey. If you're a new listener, just know I never want to be up this damn early. This is 6 a.m. my time here in Mexico. But seriously, thank you for taking the time to check this out. Please hit like and subscribe. It is a passive gesture that goes a long way in promoting this channel, getting more eyeballs on this kind of coverage. For viewers of the main show, we'll be back tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Pacific, where we'll be taking a deep dive into issue number 16 of the Crisis Papers, Reality Bites. From the Jerry Springer Show to YouTube commentary channels that run on outrage and gossip, the modern media economy runs on kayfabe, stage conflict presented as reality, where the performers play their roles and the audience becomes the mark. Now, if you do enjoy all of the diverse programming we provide here on TIR and would like to join us for our raucous champagne rooms and movie nights, then consider becoming a patron or a paid YouTube subscriber. For as little as $3 a month or a one-time payment of $30 for the year, your small donation goes a long way in making sure we can continue to stay on the air. Now, let's get to why you guys are here in the first place. So much is going on. Where to start? Last year, Deep State Kuba, along with Ben Burgess, wrote a brilliant article for Jacobin magazine warning of what possibly to expect if a second term of Trump was to happen. Kuba was frighteningly clairvoyant when many of the actions we've seen, like the doging of the bureaucratic state, the use of ICE and Border Patrol as its personal shock troops, and immigration enforcement as a jobs program for the disenfranchised lumpen, came to fruition. One thing we weren't prepared for was the global chaos that would befall the innocent during this second reign. Trump's rhetorical claim of taking over Greenland, the kidnapping of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, the bombing of fishing boats in the Caribbean, the rehashing of Cold War diplomacy with Cuba, and now reigniting a war in the Middle East, this time with Iran. Kuba will explain what we're seeing and what are the implications, not just for the U.S., but for the future of the world. At the conclusion of Kuba's presentation, we'll take your questions. Now, with that out of the way, coming at you live from his cubicle in the Death Star, please welcome Deep State Kuba.
Oh, hi.
It does look like a Death Star cubicle.
It's more of a Death Star broom closet, really. So
Like
hello,
where,
everyone. You already know me. And I'm here to help answer the question, what fresh hell are we in for today? I've prepared a few updates on issues of note. I'll go through them, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that you queue up for me in the chat. One issue that is frequently brought up is the impact of the closure of the Straits of Hormuz on oil prices. And we've already seen them spiking significantly. Tankers taking oil out from Eastern Saudi Arabia, the UAE, the Gulf states through the Straits of Hormuz to East Asia have all been bottled up inside the Persian Gulf. Attacks have taken the Qatari liquefied natural gas system completely offline. It supplies some. It's the second largest in the world, I believe, and the petrochemical processes are so complicated that it takes 2 weeks after a complete shutdown to bring them back online, and another 2 weeks to bring them fully to capacity. So we're looking at not just the logistical challenge of moving oil out of the Persian Gulf, but also a breakdown in the extraction and processing of liquefied natural gas on a grand scale. Energy prices are certainly going to spike. Most severely affected countries will be in East Asia, but Europe will take a hit too. And this is a unified global energy market. So you're going to end up with prices being impacted in North America as well. However, everyone knows about the oil going out. What is underreported is the importance of the Strait of Hormuz as a logistical channel to bring food in to the um, desert, arid, moonscape cities of the Persian Gulf. Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Doha, Manama. None of these cities are ecologically sustainable. They're built in some of the most arid and inhospitable locations in the world, and they require substantial amounts of food imports just in order to stay alive. Um, for Qatar, the food imports account between 90 and 97% of consumption. In Bahrain, it's between 90 and 92. The UAE looks downright green at a mere 80 to 90% dependency on food imports. Food also spoils quickly, and the tendency of global logistics chains has been for minimal inventories, just-in-time deliveries. We do not know how long the food stockpiles in the cities such as Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Doha, or the island of Bahrain, how long these will last. I know that the Emirates have aggressively been trying to develop offsetting sources of food, things such as urban gardens, indoor food, artificial proteins, but it looks unlikely that these are all future scoped investments that um, are at the pilot project stage at best. So we're looking at serious shortfalls in food stocks in all of these countries if the war lasts more than a couple of weeks. The As dire as the situation is for food, the reality of um, potential water shortages is even more apocalyptic. None of these countries are anywhere close to sustainability. When you look at water usage, it's generally given as a percent of um, total freshwater inputs, right? Rain, aquifers, you name it. Sustainable countries have rates of consumption below 100, although as you approach 100, then it becomes dicier and dicier. The Gulf states have water consumption orders of magnitude above what's naturally available. We're talking about 4,000, 8,000%, Trump numbers in terms of excess water usage. Where does that water come from? Desalinization plants. Now, if you're rich enough and you have access to cheap enough energy, you can just take salt water and through different biochemical processes end up with fresh drinking water. In Qatar, 90 to 100% of drinking water is supplied through desalinization. In Bahrain, 90 to 100%. And in the UAE, it rounds to an even 100. So all of these states depend on um, these massive desalinization plants for their drinking water. There are maybe a couple hundred scattered throughout the Gulf, but that is a little misleading because the um, real production occurs only at a handful of plants. For instance, Jebel Ali, a facility in Jebel Ali, supplies Dubai with 2.25 million cubic meters per day of fresh water. Abu Dhabi supplied by the Tawila plant. Fujairah supplies Sharjah and the Eastern Emirates. And Ras Lafran is the major Qatari desalinization plant. There's been criticism leveled, outrage at the Iranians for, how dare they attack the Burj Al Arab? How dare they target sites in the Gulf states in general? However, as long as these water desalinization plants are operational, we know that the Iranians aren't going full Gaza on the Gulf states. Because if these were struck and taken offline, then the situation would immediately become life-threatening for the millions of people living in the major cities of the Persian Gulf region. And as we've already seen with U.S. bases, as we've already seen with the Burj Al Arab, with sites all across the Gulf states, the missile defenses that are available that haven't been pulled back to Israel are not up to the task of stopping all of the drones and missiles that Iran can send. These are touchable sites. If Iran so chooses, it can turn the cities of the Persian Gulf back into desert. That would be a desperate move. We're talking about a real nuclear option here, but that is the level of dependency that the Gulf states have on desalination, on top of their dependence on food imports. So this is a much more severe situation. The level of vulnerability in the Gulf states is much more advanced than anything that's been presented in Western media. And when Trump says that he was surprised that the Gulf states were attacked by Iran, I wouldn't put it past him for that to be the truth, simply because he does seem to be in severe cognitive decline and was never particularly curious to begin with. But it is the most obvious thing in the world that these vulnerabilities would crop up. It became immediately apparent. Next, I wanted to discuss some of the more remote and unusual targets that have been struck by Israeli missiles and drones. In addition to American sites, in addition to Israel, drone strikes have been identified as far away as Cyprus, Royal Air Force Station Akrotiri, British base, in the Nakhchivan region of Azerbaijan. Saudi Aramco refineries have been struck, and a couple of rockets that were fired into Turkish territory were shot down. What's exceptional about these strikes is not just that they fall outside of the pattern of that we typically see with Iranian attacks, but Iran has categorically denied making all of these attacks. Iran doesn't deny terror strikes when it, through its proxies, carries that out. It celebrates whenever it hits an Israeli target. So if Iran could certainly be lying and have carried out these attacks either directly or through proxies, either as part of a deliberate strategy or what's going on with targeting and execution of many of these attacks. Now that the decapitation strikes are essentially continuous in Iran, field level commanders are authorized to hit targets from a pre-approved, pre-authorized list. It's called Mosaic Defense Strategy. It is possible that some of these sites were added to those lists. It is also possible that there are field commanders or leaders in groups such as Hezbollah that are on their own authority, going beyond the Tehran-centric strategy that had been laid out. However, it is not at all impossible that these are false flags by states that are interested in broadening the war and especially drawing in NATO, drawing in Turkey, drawing in Saudi Arabia on the side of Israel and the United States against Iran. Certainly, the attack on the British airbase in Cyprus and the rockets entering Turkish territory could potentially justify an Article 5 escalation on the part of NATO powers for collective self-defense. Then you would be looking at general engagement of Europe. In each of these cases, the governments attacked have resisted direct retaliation or engagement into the war, but have not challenged the narrative of Iranian strikes. There are some characteristics of these attacks which make it questionable whether these were serious moves by Iran. In every case, we're talking about a relatively low number of projectiles, 3, 5 maximum. So in some cases, 1 or 2. Iran understands how Western missile defenses works. You need a large number, and especially best case scenario, large number and a variety of incoming weapons in order to overwhelm whether the THAAD or the Patriot anti-missile batteries, and that's when you can do some damage. If you're shooting onesies and twosies, why even bother, right? Air defense can easily take care of those, and you're not going to inflict serious damage. And that's precisely what happened. In almost all of these cases, air defense disposed of the munitions before they could reach their purported target. You had some collateral damage on the ground. In Azerbaijan, there were some civilian wounded at the airport that was targeted, but no serious damage to infrastructure, no targets destroyed, which makes this a very questionable move if the goal were to strike enemy targets or enemy assets. Um, so there's the very real possibility that some actors are trying to broaden the war and pull in uh, new parties against Iran through attributing Iranian malfeasance or Iranian responsibility to attacks such as these, which brings us to the search for proxies. Among the groups that the United States has explicitly tried to rope in the Iran campaign are the different Kurdish resistance movements,
Mhm.
nationalist groups, both inside inside of Iran, as well as the Kurdistan regional government that operates as a de facto independent entity in Iraq. There have been announcements all over Western media about the covert CIA operation to arm the Kurds as an anti-Iranian force, and the enthusiasm and the eagerness of Kurds within Iran and in the neighboring states to liberate Iranian Kurdistan and take their territory away from the Islamic Republic. Now, I have to say that for a CIA covert program, this is remarkably well publicized. And also, um,
Is
I,
that just the moment we're in though? Because do you feel like the mask is off? I don't want to, hurt your flow, but doesn't it feel like we're done with a certain amount of coercion and you just have a guy in office that's just like, hey, this is what we're doing. Like he's actually reading the wrong cue card.
it, in this case, I don't think so. I think
Okay.
that mm, um, there have been some steps, for instance, admitting Marco Rubio's just direct admission that it was an Israeli timetable that brought about this attack on Iran, that Israel was the precipitating force. That honestly is something that a wiser administration would have downplayed. That would have been concealed. And we are seeing, uh, in terms of coverage in Western media, Western press, um, a real emphasis on the damage that Iran has been sustaining and the minimization after day 1 or 2 of the damage that is being inflicted on Israel and especially on the Gulf states. So I think that there is some message discipline and some control to try to shape the narrative here. And the fact that we're getting all of this information about the Kurdish eagerness to jump in doesn't reflect failure of OPSEC, but represents a move to try to induce Kurdish participation through, a combination of FOMO and getting the Iranians to preemptively respond, which would then trigger Kurdish self-defense. Um, Jean Bajalan the other day with uh, Professor McCoy
Mhm.
was excellent in laying out the arguments for why Kurds would be reluctant to participate as U.S. proxies in this kind of campaign. They're significantly outgunned by the Islamic Republic. They have a long history of both cooperating with the United States and then being betrayed after cooperating with the United States. Their relationship is ambivalent at best with Israel, and movement towards the unification of Kurdish territories, the enlargement of an independent Kurdistan, the establishment of a de jure Kurdish state. All of these are almost designed to trigger Turkish reaction. Turkey has had no compunctions about invading sovereign territory, Iraq, Syria, in order to destroy Kurdish national movements. So if they ever got the ball rolling against Iran and looked like they were going to get somewhere, then the Turks would be there, stepping in behind them to make sure that that didn't happen. The Kurds have been down this path often enough so that they are unlikely to eagerly play the role that the United States has cast them into as their eager proxies. Right? There's no boots on the ground. Before the run up to the Iraq War, there was a massive movement of American troops into Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. So to pre-position the forces necessary to take Iraq. None of that has happened. There are no American ground forces available to play that role. It looks like perhaps as an afterthought, or perhaps the plan all along was to try to bootstrap the Kurds to be those boots on the ground. But judging by the response from Kurdish sources, for instance, the Kurdish Democratic Party in Iraq, led by the Barzani clan, has been very clear that they are not interested. They do not want to participate in a move against Iran. And the Iranian Kurdish groups, they did form an umbrella organization on February 22nd to coordinate between themselves, anticipating that there was going to be some kind of confrontation, some kind of security crisis related to the United States. But they have not come out in favor of any moves against the Islamic Republic. The official statement of one of their leaders has been to Kurdish compatriots, desert, leave the barracks, leave the security services, leave the cities, go back to your villages, keep your head down. This is not our war, not one side, not the other. Don't die for the Islamic Republic and don't die for anyone else. So there's some hope that the Baluk, which are another cross-border ethnic group, this time on the Pakistani Afghan border with Iran. They've also been subject to severe repression by the Islamic Republic. There's also an armed militant nationalist organization there representing them. That perhaps they could represent some sort of fifth column, some proxy force available to the United States, but that has not materialized yet either. And all of this, speaking of Afghanistan and Pakistan, if anyone is having 2003 nostalgia, the only thing that's missing is a war against the Taliban. Well, you're in luck.
Shit.
A week ago, as a result of cross-border skirmishes and attacks against civilians by the Pakistani Taliban, which is different from the Taliban, which is also different from the Punjabi Taliban. The government of Pakistan declared war on Afghanistan. Pakistani troops have moved into some of the eastern provinces, Paktika, which is a different one, Khost, Narangar, several others. And there's been cross-border attacks into the federated tribal territories of Pakistan as well. Airstrikes into Afghanistan. Today, there were reports of gunfire in the Afghan capital, Kabul, but that situation is ongoing. If anybody had war with the Taliban as a bingo, and you're willing to stretch the rules to include Pakistan, well, congratulations, you get the square. Finally, The last thing that I wanted to flag there before I wrap up and start taking questions. Pakistan announced after the attribution of the attacks on the Aramco refinery to Iranian missiles that as a consequence of the security agreement they have with Saudi Arabia, any direct moves by Iran against Saudi would bring Pakistan into the war against Iran. We'll see how that situation develops. We'll see how the war with the Taliban is going to impact the ongoing situation in Iran. After all, there's a substantial Shia minority inside of Afghanistan and a porous, lengthy Afghan-Iranian border as well that could become another front in this conflict. And so, that's all the fresh hell we have for today. And let's get to questions.
Well, this is from Twitch, from Number One Handsome. This person says they're talking about troops going in. What kind of hell is that going to do? Also, the fatwa on nukes. I'm guessing that's gone now. Freaking out over here.
I would not worry about nuclear weapons on the Iranian side. Iran just doesn't have the capability. I'm afraid that I have to challenge the integrity of the Prime Minister of Israel. Iran is not 2 weeks away from a nuclear weapon now.
Jesus Christ.
In fact, it wasn't 2 weeks away from a nuclear weapon 2 weeks ago either. The prospect of a actual nuclear warhead in the hands of the Islamic Republic is vanishingly small. That you don't have to worry about. I don't know where the fissile material is. I don't know to what extent it's been concentrated. So radiological bomb, meaning a conventional bomb that just spreads radioactive material over a large distance, so-called dirty bomb. Yeah, that's possible. That's certainly possible. But it would take, just as with September 11th, an operation to take material like that, move it into position against a worthwhile target in the United States, Israel, elsewhere in the West. That's a lengthier operation. If you're in the US, this is not the period where you should be worried about Iranian reprisals. A year from now, 2 years from now, that's when we could see some spectacular acts of terrorism, especially if you remember that the Department of Homeland Security was recently in the very capable and professional hands of Christine Noem. And over the last year and a half, ever since the inauguration of Donald Trump, there's been not an ebb of talent, but absolute purges based on perceived disloyalty of some of the most experienced and professional members of the security apparatus, people involved in anti-terrorism, people involved in counter-espionage, people involved in intelligence. So at the exact moment when elements of the Islamic Republic and Shia extremists are most motivated to seek extraordinary, spectacular revenge against the United States, the capabilities to identify, predict, and counter those threats are at a minimum. And the process of hiring new people, onboarding new people in order to fill those roles is still subject to the same loyalty tests that were used to drive out people like James Comey, some of the most capable and professional members of the American security apparatus. For instance, I learned yesterday that one of the interview questions, one of the screening questions, rather, for jobs in the State Department is who won the 2020 election? And if your answer isn't Donald J. Trump, that's the end of the interview. Now, forgive me for borrowing the expression, but it makes you wonder if they're sending their best, right? So,
You know, how did anyone think the country was going to run if you've never been to Trump Palace in Atlantic City when I was there?
the remarkable thing, perhaps, is that the first Trump administration represented such continuity between Obama and Biden, right? You could basically sit out those 4 years. There was a certain amount of attrition, there was a certain amount of demoralization inside the state apparatus while Trump was in charge. But even the neocons that he brought in, people like John Bolton,
Mm-hmm.
they were creatures of the swamp. They were deep state operatives. They were people with experience who respected the institutions and understood how they functioned. This group, Hegseth, Kirsty No, uh, we're talking about, I forgive the expression, some really low IQ talent. And beyond them, figures that seem to be more capable, that should know better, like Vance and Rubio. The reason that they are in the positions that they are is because they have signaled a complete abandonment of any backbone, any spine, any willingness to push back on Trump. So they might be more competent, but they will not challenge any of the self-destructive, impulsive decision making and policy making that um, that he that like a bad Big Mac might trigger in 3 a.m. during a Twitter binge, right? So the reality is that this well-oiled machine of U.S. diplomacy, security, intelligence that had been built painstakingly, layer by layer, organization by organization, front group by front group, since the end of World War II. That institutionalized structure has been completely decapitated and replaced by the court of the Mad King, where Trump is surrounded by loyalists from different factions with different personal interests, and he adjudicates policy based on what's good for him at a particular moment and who screamed loudest most recently and looks good on TV. So
The
all
last
of
part, yeah.
Mhm. So we're in dicey straits, and the I don't know if this has been enough of a wake up call for Trump to start to defer to generals, to the few people who still operate inside of the organization, inside the state apparatus, and who have some channel of communication that can reach him, or if this just makes him double down on personalism and turn his attention to more pleasant matters like the statues for the White House courtyard or the size of the interior decor of his new ballroom.
There's a new ballroom, and there's going to be a big UFC fight. Remember that?
Oh yeah, that's going to be great. I hope it's Vance
Yeah.
versus Rubio.
All right, this is from Matt Gilbert. Someone said they didn't want to ask you a question because they already cried today. It was Andy. Do you remember Andy from New York? Black fellow.
I think we met at the live show.
Yep. Yeah.
Yes. I recall that. I'm sorry, man.
When you're like, hey man, when you're me.
It takes me all year to build back up supplies in my tear ducts, and then they're gone within 48 hours.
I can vouch for that. This is from Matt Gilbert. He says, my question is about the role of apocalyptic Christian Zionist ideology in motivating this war. We've had Hegseth and Lindsey Graham pretty much just say it's a holy war. To what extent should we take them at their word?
So Hegseth, without a doubt, is a true believer. What Hegseth says it, he means it. Lindsey Graham, he's a closeted gay man. He's an alcoholic. He's painfully lonely. His life is so bereft of meaning, and he's prostituted the last shreds of his dignity so fully and completely that I don't know if he can mean anything anymore.
Damn.
But there's certainly constituency for that type of apocalyptic Christian nationalist, Christian Zionist perspective, that type of eschatological geopolitics within the, I hate to say it, Department of War and within the armed services. That was always part of the melting pot or mosaic of different subcultures within the American security apparatus. It wasn't always dominant. In fact, there were plenty of figures in leadership, which was very clear under Biden. You know, the so-called woke generals that were not interested in boosting that type of worldview. They were not interested in pursuing that kind of security policy. But Hegseth is one of them, right? And he brought in that notorious Christian nationalist preacher to talk to the troops. There was complaints that were lodged a few days ago, where across the entire military at different bases at different facilities, troops were briefed that this was a holy war, that this was a religious war, that Trump had been anointed to light the fire towards Armageddon with this Iran campaign. We know this because the military, despite what Hegseth would like you to believe, is a religiously pluralistic institution. It has plenty of non-believers, plenty of mainstream Christians that don't have any patience for this kind of degraded apocalyptic theology. And they lodged complaints with both internally and with various watchdog groups. So I think that's my deep anxiety, because this is a pattern that I've seen across different societies, is that you have a leadership class which at point A makes the purely tactical, cynical decision to exploit some ideological tendency as a means of shoring up their power and legitimacy. You know, tap into this particular religious movement in order to secure their votes or to get their backing within the security services. And so you tell them what they want to hear, right? Whether it's Christian nationalism in the United States or revisionist Zionism in Israel or Chinese nationalism in the PRC. And the first generation does it purely cynically, right? I need to do something else. This will help me do it. So I'm just going to lie. I'm going to tell them what they hear, what they want to hear. And they know that it's a lie. They know it's just chum for the rubes, right? Don't take it seriously. Their successors continue to do that because it proves to be effective. And not only that, but you fed the roots. So now there's more, they're stronger. You've become dependent on them. So you have to keep it going. But your mentor, your predecessor, who you respect, who opened the door for you, has explained to you that this is just a lie we tell in order to get what we want. So they continue saying it, but already the psychological barrier, the clarity, is beginning to wear down. And in the third generation, the successors of the successors, that leadership class now just they're the roots, right? They have absorbed that worldview as a consequence of hearing it all the time, and they don't realize that it was always a lie. I think that Trump clearly does not believe in. I don't think he's capable of theology. I wonder if he's capable of faith. But there is something flattering to his ego about the notion of being anointed. He likes the fawning attention that he gets from weird Christian nationalists and figures around him. Certainly, Hegseth really do believe this. Really do. Really are guided by this worldview. Now, who's going to replace him? And then who's going to replace the replacement? Are we locked in this escalating eschatological vision of Christian Zionism? I don't know. It certainly looks like the mainstream of the American public is turning against it. Israel has never been less popular. And even among Christian conservatives, there's figures like Tucker Carlson that have embedded anti-Zionism and maybe more than a smidge of Fuentes curious anti-Semitism into their pitch. So that may be a corrective, but it's a very dicey matter. It may very well be that at some point there's an escalatory order, which will need to be countermanded on the level of field officer. There were several times during the Cold War when the personal integrity and moralistic humanistic morality of this is certainly attested to on the Soviet side. I think the Americans are keeping hush about their cases. But on several occasions, we've been saved from nuclear annihilation by the integrity of a Soviet officer who received an order, either through doctrine or directly, to fire nuclear weapons and chose not to.
We have another question from Red. Red asks, Kuba, do you think the danger of the U.S. running out of interceptors is real? And in such a scenario, will Iran be able to strike with their ballistic missiles at will?
Absolutely, yes. I think the stockpiles of American interceptors are dwindling very rapidly. It's a cause of concern throughout the entire region. It's becoming an issue within the Department of Defense because the CENTCOM, and the DoD is divided into geographical commands, and the Middle East falls under CENTCOM. There's AFRICOM, PACOM, which is the Pacific Command, and they have separate stockpiles and separate logistics hierarchies. What we're seeing now is requests from CENTCOM for PACOM to transfer its anti-missile systems, the ones that are supposed to protect against China, North Korea, the ones that are stationed in Seoul and Okinawa, to move those into the Middle East so they can be used to protect against Iranian missiles. So yeah, the interceptors are definitely, they're running out. The American industrial capacity to produce more of them, forget that. Right? We're decades away from replenishing stockpiles. We're nowhere close to keeping up with the rate of usage, let alone building back up. Once those are gone, it does become a little dicey as to what Israel, the Gulf states, American forces can do to prevent incoming missiles from striking their targets and doing what they're supposed to. One reason why I'm skeptical about some of the defensive plans that have been proposed by Trump, for instance, using naval assets to escort tankers traders, other shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, is that those vessels also, the reason that they're effective isn't because they've got some armor or some, aura that's shielding ships around them. No, they have portable, right, anti-missile systems, whether they be railguns or interceptors. Now, those get used up, and then you can do a few passages, but at a certain point, the ships need to retire in order to restock. And from the Persian Gulf, it's 3 day sailing to Diego Garcia to pick up new ones, and a 3 day sailing back. So it's fanciful to imagine that naval escorts are going to be a solution to the risk of navigating the Strait of Hormuz, especially at a scale that would be required to maintain life support for Gulf cities and move energy supplies out into global markets.
There's a little bit of a distortion with your audio. All of a sudden, it's going in and out. I don't know if it's probably just where you are. Yeah, Kuba is stuck in a place where Wi-Fi is not going to be as crispy as it usually is.
If somebody wants to come to Warsaw and sort out my audio, I'm very happy. But I've fiddled with the knobs.
That'd be really cool though if you got a knock on the door. Like I was watching the show and I just happen to have this podcast set up. This is from Prairie Fire, our good friend in Nebraska, who you also met in New York. Kuba, what do you think the Israelis are attempting to do with their anti-Turkish rhetoric that appears to be escalating?
I think that just as Trump is high on his own supply after Venezuela, the Israelis have experienced such a long string of wins that they're out of touch with reality. And so far, they've gotten everything that they want. One by one, all of the challenger states that pose a threat to them have been shattered by American power, by Israeli force, underwritten by American power, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Syria, whether it's Hezbollah in Lebanon, Gaddafi in Libya, and now Iran. Basically, they've gone through their wish list all the way down. And to a certain extent, this Iran war, because of the vulnerability of the GCC states, has also taken care of the UAE and Qatar, right? It'll be forever for those countries to build back. Their relationship with the United States, their security arrangement has been ruptured forever. So they're very comfortable with the way that things are going, assuming that they can disengage before Iran is able to penetrate fully the Iron Dome. And now they've basically gone through their entire wish list and they're flipped the page just to see what else they could possibly ask for from Santa. And it's like, what? Turkey hasn't been as nice to us as it could have been. The reality is that Turkey is sponsoring groups within Syria, for instance, that could at one point potentially pose a threat to Israel. It has been active in Libya. It has been active in parts of Africa in ways that could potentially one day challenge Israeli interests. And I think that they're priming their American benefactors for the eventual ask to one day help them take care of everyone. I think that what they've already got is more than they can chew. We'll see how the Middle East looks at the end of this conflict with Iran, but Turkey would be just an absolute stretch goal. And the reality too is that for Israeli domestic politics to be stable, there needs to be a threatening enemy. You need to have some kind of potentially existential menace just over the horizon in order to maintain unity, siege mentality that keeps Israeli society cohesive. That allows you to keep going with this Spartanification, militarization of increasingly illiberal, increasingly apartheid-oriented, increasingly expansionist, settler-based Zionism. And I think that Turkey is being trotted out as sort of next season's villain.
I never heard it put that way before. This is from someone, I can't pronounce their name. Is there any distinguishable difference between the Afghan and Pakistani Taliban, ideological or otherwise?
Interesting question. So the main difference, and I don't mean this to be, I don't mean this to sound glib, but one of them won and the other did not. The Afghan Taliban is actually running an Islamic emirate. They control Kabul. They have resources at their disposals. They have embassies and consulates, and they need to worry about making a success of governing this territory. The Pakistan Taliban is still at the insurgency and terrorism phase with an emphasis on terrorism. They kill a lot of civilians for no good reason. To a sufficient extent that the Afghan Taliban has, before this flare up with Pakistan, told the Pakistani Taliban, like, hey, guys, come on, cool it. Like, enough with women and children, right? Like, maybe just attack police and security personnel like a gentleman. So, but in terms of their ideology, in terms of their ethnic composition, in terms of their original grounding, they're not only identical, but they're both based from the same region. It's the Pashtun borderlands between Pakistan and Afghanistan, which ever since the Soviet occupation were a hotbed for CIA and Pakistani and Saudi backed madrasas, training camps, and mujahideen organizations that were explicitly Islamist, explicitly fundamentalist, and oriented against Shia, oriented against leftists, oriented against Western democracy. So they come from the exact same milieu, the same area. The biggest difference is that one now has the responsibility of governing, and the other is still waging its insurgency, still out in the jungle, so to speak.
And this question is from Adam. Are we seeing the typical results of a purge led by Russ Vogel, Doge, and this Yarvanesque anti-bureaucratic tendency?
So whenever you have purge of any organization based on ideological lines, you're going to have a period of readjustment and reorientation as personnel exit, institutional knowledge is lost, new people are brought in and have to be brought up to speed, objectives shift, objectives change. Now, this happens in the Chinese Communist Party, right? This happens in the Taliban, right? This happens in any organization. However, the ideological character of the purge matters because it's not red hat, blue hat, right? It's not 50-50, some arbitrary distinction where half the people have to go and half the people have to stay. No, there's a selection mechanism. If the people that you're purging are being purged for corruption, say, then if we take the Chinese Communist Party, for instance, and you actually go after corrupt officials, let's say there's no political orientation. Let's just go after the corrupt officials. Well, in order to be an effective corrupt official inside the Chinese Communist Party, you have to understand business. You have to have connections in the private sector. You have to know what's useful for private companies to have access to, what's useful for them, what regulations they want to escape from, these kinds of things. Not only that, but all of your ill-gotten gains then mean that on the consumer side, you have more familiarity with capital markets, banking, probably more connections with foreigners. So you're cutting out the corruption, but you're also, that disproportionately means you're losing people with a certain set of economic expertise and a certain set of connections within the private sector and potentially abroad. So what you're left with is not just half of the bureaucracy, but you're left with a slightly less capable, much less corrupt set. Similarly, if you were to purge based on DEI, right, you're going to lose things like foreign policy, foreign language training, the ability to code switch between different types of communication. You're going to lose experience with foreign cultures, and instead you're going to over-index on white men. And the way that the purge has gone in terms of who's being purged, who's being replaced, and who's not being replaced, because there's entire agencies that are being liquidated. The Doge bot purges are much more damaging to American state capacity than if you just fired all the Democrats, for instance. Like, you would have been better off just doing that. You're really going after. Russell Vaught was completely frank and direct about this. He says, I want to demoralize the federal bureaucrats. I want them to wake up and not want to go in into work during the day. I want them to want to quit. I want them to hate their lives. Well, mission accomplished. And now, your State Department can't evacuate people from a war zone. Your Department of Defense can't plan adequate logistics for a major operation. Who knows what kind of intelligence they're getting from the Middle East? Now, the attacks against Iranian leadership figures may appear to be a great success, great achievement of American intelligence, but you don't know to what extent that intelligence came out of American CIA sources, how much of it came in via Israel, how much came in via the Gulf states and was vetted and then processed, sterilized, put the CIA seal on it, put it on our letterhead, and then send it up to the president. But what we do know is that starting with George W. Bush and the Russia war in Iraq, there was a massive exodus of talent, especially regional experts from the CIA and intelligence agencies, because all of their intelligence, all of their briefings, all of their analysis was just disregarded completely, thrown in the shredder. So why stick around at a place where you're treated with that much disrespect? Obama rebuilt the intelligence apparatus to a certain extent, but the people that are going to sign up for Obama are going to be different than the people who left under Bush. Younger generation, different cohort, more idealistic perhaps, probably less military experience. Then under Biden, under Trump, you had another exodus, more retirements, more separations, more resignations. Biden, one reason why we had I'm a bipolar, neurodivergent Latina with generalized anxiety disorder, and I'm proud to work for the CIA. One reason you had that kind of recruiting is because the intelligence agencies desperately needed people. Right? They needed to get more bodies in the door to replace the Trump era losses, and this seemed like a good recruiting strategy at the time. of course, then Trump comes back in, and all of those people get fired, right? So right now, the intelligence agencies are, I'm hearing scary things. And I don't particularly like the American intelligence
agencies. Yeah. When you have the B team of intelligence agencies now, it's like, Jesus Christ. What does Kuba think of the industrial capacity of Iran to out? Did I ask that already? No,
you did not.
What does Kuba think of the industrial capacity of Iran to outpace U.S. Patriot and THAAD production with its drones and missiles?
I'm just going to say I don't know, because that's a sort of empirical question where there's going to be an answer, and I don't have it. I will add the nuance that you don't have to think about. We're not starting at zero, and it's a race between Iranian production and American production. The Iranians have been stockpiling drones and missiles for decades, right? This is exactly the sort of war they expected to happen at some point. I don't know how much of that ordnance is just sitting around in mountain silos all across central Iran. It could be an insane amount, or most of it could have been destroyed already. It may have been badly maintained. I will say that the fact that the Shahid drone and this Iranian designed $50,000 one-way suicide drone has become a ubiquitous weapon on both sides of the Ukrainian-Russian war, as well as a tool for insurgencies and different non-state actors all across Africa, all across the Middle East, places as far away as Myanmar, suggests that somewhere, like the AK-47, somewhere there's got to be, head down, anti-Santa as his elves just churning out one after another on the assembly lines. And potentially one of those facilities is somewhere relatively secure in Iran, and if that's the case, yikes. But there's also the issue that there is a relatively secure supply chain, supply lines between Russian heavy industry and Iran. Now, the Ukraine war, of course, has been just absorbing Russian production like mad. But if Russia opts, or China, to divert some of their production to keep the United States bogged down in Iran, I don't know when you run out of drones in that case.
This question is from Eric. Kuba, do you think the Republican Party is basically finished from this conflict?
Yes. I was at a study group yesterday in Warsaw when we were talking about Trump's United States with a journalist that's been covering it, has extensive contacts over there. What he was saying, what I've been seeing, what I've been hearing, it all aligns with a very dire electoral environment for the Republicans. Now, we're already seeing the sort of MAGA civil war between Tucker Carlson, potentially Fuentes adjacent, Nat Khan, right, versus Trump loyalists. I saw a throwdown with Tucker Carlson and Cenk Uygur, which was the stuff of sort of Zionist centrist nightmares, right? Like they were really, the chemistry was there between the two of them.
Bro down.
Yeah. Wow. And it all came down to death of Israel. So it's possible I anticipate that 2026 is going to just be a blowout. Then the question is, are you going to have a fast enough consolidation of authoritarianism so that Republicans continue to lose? Are they going to be able to accelerate their timetable so that you'll have you'll end competitive elections by the midterms? That's not impossible. All it takes is some serious terrorist attack on U.S. soil, attributable to Iran, regardless of who actually carries it out. And then you've got pretexts to declare a state of emergency, martial law. Apparently, the executive orders to federalize the election have already been prepared for Trump to sign. He's just waiting for a pretext. So the Republicans electorally are definitely cooked. The civil peace, right, the unity of the MAGA coalition is irreparably fractured. But we don't know what the effects of that are going to be because our assumptions about what it means for the Republicans to be cooked are based on scenario in which elections are fair enough, and electoral integrity is real. You have predictable and traditional connection between popularity and political outcomes. But these are not. We're very far from that baseline scenario, right? I don't know where we are now.
And this might be the last question. This is from Dizzle. He says, Kuba, do you think the bloat of the contractor state will strangle our capacity to replenish, and have we fallen into the German trap, overly complicated designs and expensive arm?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. To the extent that Trump had to call Zelensky and ask him for help to stop the drones because the Ukrainians were better at it than the United States.
I wish I could have been there for that call.
Yeah, yes, Mr. President. Yes. Oh, something has fallen out of my pocket. I believe it is all of the cards.
Trying to embarrass. Is this the first time that we've seen such a? I guess Bush Jr. was kind of bad when it came to foreign policy, but there was kind of a goofiness to him. And I'm not saying I miss the days of Bush too, but
I miss the days of Bush too. We take that over this. Yeah, 100%. That was terrible. It was really bad.
Yeah, it was really bad.
Part of what made it so bad is that it paved the way for this. Right? But if we could go back to that save point and try to do something else, in a heartbeat, right? I would give up my favorite tie. So, no, this is the worst that I have, the worst misgovernance I have experienced in any major country. Well, in the United States, certainly over my lifetime, maybe Yeltsin was as bad for Russia as Trump is for the United States. But yeah, this is really bad.
Political Pain says, dark times, my friends, dark times indeed. Thank you, Kuba, for joining us and answering these questions. If you guys have more questions after the show, leave them in the comments, and there's a good chance Kuba will return your question. He actually reads the comments. I'm getting better at ignoring.
I do. And if you want to my audio, Just give me your coordinates so I can answer you by drone.
I wish I could. I wish I had that power. I totally. And what was that? Who's a bitch now? Okay, yeah. But you won't comment again, you son of a bitch. Thank you, Kuba, and have a good rest of your evening in beautiful, beautiful downtown Warsaw. And have a good night. This is Deep State Kuba. He's my good friend, one of the foreign policy experts on this show. I should have linked it and I didn't, but he did write. He doesn't write too much for magazines. I think maybe he's written 2 or 3 articles in the last 2 years that I can remember off the top of my head. But the article that he wrote with Ben Burgess, I think, is kind of important because he really did lay out, or Ben in Cuba really did lay out what we were going to see with Trump 2.0. And one of the scary predictions that he had was using ICE as a jobs program, something we didn't really get into because, again, this show is going to be more about foreign policy than it is about all issues domestic. But man, seeing that. And he also called that Trump was going to just, ravage the bureaucratic state. And sure enough, here we are, all doged out. I will be back tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. with Pascal and M. Toussaint, talking about things a little less grim, but grim none the least. And on that note, I am out.